Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Many viewers will be aware of my coverage of the endeavours of two independent thinking historians, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett. If you want to learn more about their work, please follow this link. Today's guest has been closely collaborating with Wilson and Blackett for the last 4 years and is on a crusade to revive their work and encourage people to follow on from their work by searching for and sharing new historical discoveries. He's already had some success bringing awareness to Britain's hidden history with his YouTube channel and website. Welcome, Ross Broadstock.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
All right, it's great to have you here, and I've been meaning to get you on the show for quite a while now. Now, you and I met, I think, first at one of my lectures in Caerphilly, maybe 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, I think the Merthyr one's before that, actually.
Before that,
yes,
right.
Yeah.
So about four years ago. And can you first give us just a little bit of background about yourself in terms of, how did you come to find out about the work of Wilson and Blackett, and what brought you to that? Maybe a little bit of your own background as well.
Okay, well, I'm delighted that you asked that question because, like most people I discovered it through your channel. And I was actually looking on a completely separate topic. And you can see the thing there, Welsh forensic historians, caught my eye, and I started watching it. I just amazed I'd never seen any of this before. I mean, I've been interested in history all my life. Why had I never heard any of this before? What's it all about? Mm-hmm. And I was immediately hooked into it. And that going off and running. And the amazing thing is how many other people I speak to also discovered their work through your channel. Right. I mean, my own background, I was extremely mainstream most of my life. I worked in London in marketing, sort of selling advertising space. I organised exhibitions, that kind of thing. Always interested in history, always followed that. And then about how old's my oldest son now? He's 13, almost 14. So about 9-10 years ago, my little boy said to me one day, I was doing a little history of the 20th century with him. Mm-hmm. And we went through sort of little very potted history for a young child about World War I and World War II. And he turned around and said to me, hang on a second, he said, I thought you said Germany had no money after World War I. And I was like, yes. So how did they afford all those tanks and everything for World War II then? Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's a really good question, I'll look into that. And then you open up the doors and then one thing leads to another topic, and so many things you think are true aren't, and that's why I end up on your channel, yeah.
So you looked into the funding of Adolf Hitler then?
Yes, all that stuff,
which is another...
That's a huge, World War II is another... Yeah. We had enough trouble already with controversial history from the 6th century, so I'll stay clear of the 20th century, but yes.
Yeah, okay, well, I first got in touch with Wilson and Blackett through Adrian Gilbert. I met Adrian Gilbert at a conference in, I think it was about 2009. I then went to see Wilson and Blackett after I'd heard about their work. And then not long after that is when they had this very odd attack on Baron Blackett. This bomb was put under his bed, and he was nearly killed.
Yes.
So that really fascinated me, and that's what compelled me to help them and get involved in exposing, what's going on here. Why are these guys being targeted? Mm-hmm. So my collaboration with them sort of started then around about 2010-11, and then it went up until I moved to Wales, where I was unable to keep in touch with them then. So that was probably to about 2016. And during that period, I would go and visit them maybe once a fortnight, have dinner with them.
Oh, as often as that, right?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I was obviously selling a lot of their books on my website, which they were very grateful for. They had this huge cellar full of books that just hadn't shifted. And
that's where I bought my first books from your website, yes.
Yeah, and so I really sort of had less contact with them from about 2016 onwards, but you then endeavoured to go and see them yourself.
Yes.
Sort of 2017, 2018 would it be? So just tell us, so you felt so passionate about their work that you wanted to actually go up to Newcastle and go and meet them.
Yes, well the first thing that caught my interest, I mean all of it was fascinating, but the books are out there and it was all happening. But in the book Moses in the Hieroglyphs, in there, just buried away in this big 400-page book, is how they cracked reading Egyptian hieroglyphs, which to me that's like a Nobel Prize or something right there. You can read hieroglyphs, no one's done this before, and it worked so brilliantly. So that was actually my first line of interest, because at the time, it seemed like you were selling the books and they get promoted and the work was available. And I was going up there to say, right, I just want to do a book about hieroglyphs, because I think this is lost in that big book. This needs its own platform. That was my first interest. But then what you realise, I mean, that some of the sort of the side of things I don't like to get into is more your channel, about the trouble they were getting and the tax on them and all that kind of stuff, realised that all their work was effectively being censored. You couldn't get hold of it. So people were setting up things and getting closed down, and I was like, right, well, I'm going to make the books available.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing, the difference between myself and Ross is Ross steers clear of politics and just bad behaviour, let's say. He's interested you're interested in the history because it's fascinating enough, and it's, I wouldn't say that. I passionately watch your channel. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. It's fantastic, and all those topics. But what I'm trying to do is keep that well clear from presenting their work, because it's hard enough already. There's already enough trouble, if you like, just getting this alternative look at history across. The last thing you need is more throwing in more or getting labelled. You know, you are the kind of things that you have to go through. It's a different. I mean, what you do is amazing, and it's a different field. Because even in the group, let's say, that follow Wilson and Blackett, there's splinter groups and arguments, isn't there?
Well, hopefully,
politics but some of it has been nasty. No.
Yeah, well, yeah, I suppose so. But I like to do on that, because hopefully that's all in the past. I mean, I think people were trying maybe to, I don't know what they're trying to do, monopolise their work or shut it down or whatever. I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, I'd like to just put all that behind us. And we have a much more open discussion. And I wouldn't like it if everyone had the same views on all of it. And what we're trying to do at the moment is get their work more widely available and really research it. You know, when we're republishing books, they've got more references and all the criticisms that have been levelled in the past, addressing, and hopefully the work can get explored and become a legitimate, mature subject.
So you went to see Alan Wilson.
I'm just taking a bit of video because people keep asking me how you are.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm surviving.
Surviving?
Well, who keeps asking?
Well, fans of your TV shows.
No idea.
About the fact that he explains how to interpret hieroglyphs, and you ended up writing your own book based on that section of their work.
Correct, yes.
So just tell us about that book, Ross.
Oh, well, I came up with this word Cymroglyphics, which seems to have caught on. And the book's done really well, and it's even been published in America as well now. And it's fully attributed to Wilson and Blackett. Because another thing, I'm very keen on correct attributions. And you've seen some books in that have pretty much gleaned their work. And I wonder if some people are just waiting for him to die. I know it sounds horrible, but Alan's now 90. Yeah. And then he can just walk off. I don't know. Anyway, let's not get into that side. But the Cymroglyphics book it's just so wonderful how it works. It's very hard to dispute if you can get people to look at it. And we can go through some examples maybe a little bit later. But it's so fundamental. And what it opens up then, the questions, is how can we possibly have this link whereby the language Cymraeg or Welsh can be used back in the Middle East? Because then this feeds in to the whole migrations. This is why everything's interlinked. As Wilson and Blackett explained, they did not set out to translate hieroglyphs. That was never their intention. What they did do was look at the ancient British historical records, look at the old British writing system, which is much ridiculed, Culbran, and the old Welsh writing. And then you can trace that back to Italy, and you can read Etruscan. You can go back to Anatolia, and there's Phrygian. All these languages break down. And then when they follow in the British history, say we go back to the Middle East and Egypt, and you've got the whole thing about the lost tribes and all these kind of stuff. Well, if they do, let's see if we can read the hieroglyphs. And it just dropped out. It didn't take them 20 years to crack it. It took them like half an hour because...
Right. Well, we're going to look at some examples of that in a second, Ross. But just so your collaboration with them then, you decided to get their books republished because some of them were out of print, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know what's happened to them all. I don't know. I don't get in this conspiracy world or whatever, but where do they all go? You know, we got the original hardbacks, which he was selling. You know, the big black books, as we call them, the BBBs. But things like Moses and the Hieroglyphs, where were all the copies? King Arthur Conspiracy, the Trojan War, all this stuff they did into ancient history. None of it was available.
Right.
So I was like, well, let's make it available.
Yeah, I mean, when I lost touch with them when I moved to Wales, it wasn't practical for me to keep going, getting the books from their cellar and bring them back to where I
I know
was.
that feeling. Yes.
But you started doing that yourself.
Yes.
Getting books from their archive and putting them on your own website for sale. So do you want to just go through the books that are available, still available now, and the ones that you've had reprinted?
Yeah. Okay. And one thing I'd like to say on this as well is that one of the things I really want to emphasise is that all the work I'm doing and the revenue raised and everything is shared with Wilson and Blackett. I mean, they need help in their old age, if you like. They, you know, this is all part of the practical help for it. So all the books, like the ones you see here, like these are the three ones they did first. All these, I bought all these cash up front, and then we resell them on. You know, obviously make a bit of a markup, but that's the. So we got, this is one, Arthur and the Charts of the Kings. Then we got Arthur, King of Glamorgan and Gwent. And this is their sort of novelisation of a lot of the events, Arthur the War King, where you can follow the campaigns, the famous battles up to Scotland, going back a couple of generations to set the scene as well. These are big books. I mean, this is the thing. These are, and there's only so many of these left, and I'm not sure these will ever be reprinted.
Right. Yeah. They were printed.
These are the ones you sold. Yeah.
Yes.
These are printed back in the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, and they all claim that Arthur was a 6th century king with possibly a previous Arthur about 300 years earlier. So they talk of two Arthurs.
Yes.
The main Arthur is the 6th century king who fought in Europe, I think, and is the legendary King Arthur of the
the
King Arthur legend.
Yes,
This is who he really was. He was the king of Glamorgan and Gwent.
Correct.
And that's what the Arthurian side of Wilson Blackett's work supports or seeks to prove. Yeah.
Yes, Arthur ap Myrig, son of Myrig and Tudrig. So in here, what they've done is they pieced together the whole genealogy of the High Kings, the Welsh royal family. So you can see his father was Myrig, grandfather Tudrig, Taithfalt. You can go all the way back. That's, as you correctly say, there's two Arthurs. And what seems to have happened, and this would have been done by Griffith ap Arthur, or Geoffrey of Monmouth, as he's more commonly referred to. He's one of the pieces of work I've put together at the moment. There's so much to publish still from there. I mean, given their notes and work, and there's tons, getting it all together on this vast range of subjects. One of the fascinating things they've done there is piece together these genealogies and unpicked. What happened with Griffith ap Arthur or Geoffrey of Monmouth is it seems he's collected this huge pile of manuscripts and earlier history. And you can imagine it arriving like that, well, not exactly like that, but all different bits, and some of it's a bit broken up and different styles. And he's tried to collate it all to make a consistent narrative. Now, if you go on a mainstream history site, people say, oh, it's just pseudo-history, it's nonsense, he's invented it. Where the genius of Alan Wilson, he's looked at it and thought, well, actually, all these things do check out. Just the overall story is obviously incorrect. Like, if there was only one Arthur, how could he fight the Romans at the end of the 4th century and fight the Saxons in the 6th century? He'd have to be 200 years old. Once you start unpicking it, and this is the fascinating thing, which is, I love their work so much. Most historians will say, well, this is a load of rubbish. What they'll do is, Wilson and Blackett will do is take it all apart, and then the amazing thing is then put it back together in the correct order.
Yes.
And suddenly it all makes sense. And this is the wonderful thing about it. And this goes through the next stage of the work they've done is going through all the old British kings, like the ones even Shakespeare wrote about, like Lear and people like that. And there's a big discussion these days about Malmudian law and who Malmud was and when he was. Well, with the work that's coming out, you can then place him correctly in history, and people can have a shock, because what's happened, similar to with the Egyptology, Egyptian history, in some cases we have parallel dynasties. And the collator, medieval or wherever, modern, has put them this way.
Right.
So actually, you've got 1,000 years of history, which should only be a couple of 100 years of history.
I see.
So someone like Malmud, for example, he could be 400 AD rather than 400 BC. It makes that kind of difference, big differences.
Okay.
So so what they're doing is putting back together the whole structure. And the reason why Arthur's important is because everything would have disappeared. All of it would have just got pushed out of history and forgotten. But Arthur's such a strong narrative that went, over to France and then back again. You can't hide it, and that's why it stands out.
Okay.
So it's not just about Arthur, but he's the sort of famous name, the shining light, the star of the show, if you like.
All right. Now, after they published these 3 books, the next book was Artorius Rex Discovered.
Yep.
Because they did an archaeological dig at the location where they believe Arthur is buried, and they found the famous stone with Rex Artorius encarved in it. And that book speaks about that.
Artorius Rex.
Yeah. So you can get that from Ross's website.
Yeah, we've got some of these left again.
Yeah, there's not many left, I believe.
No. This one we might be able to republish. They would never be republished like this as big hardbacks.
Right.
And again,
so if you run out of that one, you might republish it.
yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So
It might need some revision. What I want to say, for all these books, there's a combination of reprints and republishing. It's an incredibly light editorial touch because it's just a tricky balance. Because the magic of their writing, which people enjoy so much, is that pugnacious, hard-hitting style, which doesn't help you win academic friends.
Yeah, we are a bit pissed off about all this. It comes across.
Whereas it's like they call academics gathering like a bovine herd, all this kind of stuff. We could come on to that, but you've got to keep that kind of flavour into it. What you can't do, in my view, when editing, is remove any of the findings or historical stuff. What you do find in some of the books, I think those who've read them will realise, you do get a bit of meandering and
repetition.
Whole chunks get repeated. And I mean, just a slight aside, why that happens is a fascinating story to show you the mind of this person, Alec Wilson. There was a period where he had cataracts, and he could hardly see at all. He was practically blind while he waited for the operations. So Baron Blackett would read, all these ancient historical books, Tacitus and all these records and all that. He would read them to him. Alan would take it all in because he can't see it or write or make notes. Then when it came to writing the book, they'd say, right, let's do the next chapter. And Alan would just say it.
Right.
And Tony would record it, and then it would take him a couple of weeks to type it up. And then you get the next chapter. So one of the reasons you get the repetition is almost if you were doing a course at university, and it's a 10-lecture course. So if lecture 5, you'd say, well, if you remember what we said in lecture 1, we covered blah, 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 blah. In a book, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it verbally like he was, there's going to be recaps. And what gives a nice note of authenticity is when you do get these repetitions, they always correlate, They don't suddenly get a different version in different chapters.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so taking some of that out to make the books flow better, and adding indexes and references, that kind of stuff.
So do you want to show us some of the books that you've had reprinted?
Yeah, well, this is just a straight reprint. This is Moses in the Hieroglyphs. So I would love to go through and do a full second edition, as you'll see with Trojan War in a second. So this, you can see the size of it. This is just vast.
So just on the front cover here, just to point out that Ross is a cartoon artist, and he's actually drawn caricatures of Wilson and Blackett on the front of the republished books.
Yeah.
And you did one of me as well.
I did. I've actually got that somewhere,
All right.
But there's no copyright issues on these books because I've redrawn all the illustrations and maps and everything that needs drawing.
So Moses and the Hieroglyphs, what does that cover?
Because this book just fascinated me because it's they wanted to explore this history and what's in the hieroglyphs and everything. So it's almost as an aside. So the first thing we had to do is work out how to read hieroglyphs. So we all sat down and, that's how you read hieroglyphs. It's almost discarded in this book, whereas when I was reading it, wow, that's an amazing discovery. So this covers so much. It's got where Alexander the Great was buried and all this. The reason why it's called Moses in the Hieroglyphs is what they've revealed is you can indeed find the Old Testament biblical characters in the hieroglyphs, and you can find the stories. There's a lot of interest in this book. So, for example, who the Queen of Sheba was, why she had to travel. She was an Egyptian heiress, and there was no males with the right godlike royal level to have children with. So this is why she had to go and see Solomon, and this is the journey and what it was about, and she had to take the gifts with her, and the gifts that came back, and the boats, the voyage. It all makes sense, and so much of it in there. And then, see what they've also done is translate loads and loads of passages from hieroglyphs.
Right, so these are Egyptian hieroglyphs.
Yes.
Right, in Egypt.
Yes.
Right, that academics don't know what they mean.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? And Wilson and Blackett have taken them and said, well, actually, what they're saying is this.
Yes.
And you've written your own book specifically about interpreting the hieroglyphs, right? We'll come on to that.
Yes,
we'll do some examples. Yes. So do you want to go through some of the other books you've had reprinted?
Okay,
people can read about them on your website.
Yes.
Well,
in many ways, you say I'm more interested in how you read the hieroglyphs than what they say. I know it sounds a bit crazy, but anyone could pick it up, because just to finish on this one is where it does go through then is because what's important for where this ties in with the British history is people like Joseph or Joseph turn up in the stories, as does Moses, and you can follow the story and you can work out who the Hyksos were. They're not these shepherds wandering down from the hills as we're generally presented to us. This was a royal dynasty. This was a powerful nation, and they've come in and they've run Egypt. And once your eyes are opened, you can read it in the Bible. The Bible confirms all this. It's just how you read it.
So just one question, Ross, about Moses and the hieroglyphs. If Moses is in the hieroglyphs, does that mean that the Bible just copied it from the hieroglyphs and Moses didn't really exist at that time? He was actually much earlier and was an Egyptian character, or what? What does that mean, that Moses was in the hieroglyphs?
Well, it gives the whole story of him in there. Well, it's a good question, actually, because the amazing thing about it, the place where you can actually see his name as he of the basket. One of the things you have to remember, with someone like a character like Moses, he's got a load of names, right? At least 10. So the mother has got a name, something like, a gift from God. The father's like the one who returned because he went and came back. The Egyptians call him he of the basket because the whole story with him in the basket in the Nile and the Egyptian princess finding him. So in there you can follow the whole story of Moses, which is why but where it gets the irony is that one of the great messages in here is that at the end of his life, when they come to the Promised Land, after they've left Egypt, in the Bible story, the story just ends. So we're left with the impression that this lonely old man just, I don't know, what did he do? Just die on a hill or something, or just dig himself a grave, because he wasn't allowed to go into the Promised Land, if you remember. Joshua has to take them in. Was what Wilson Blackett shows, he actually returned to Egypt. And this makes sense of there's a scene, a lot of this has to come from the Torah rather than the Bible, which ties in with the hieroglyphs as well. But there's a scene in there where, it's a bizarre scene where a young girl is put in his tent for the night. And why has he done that? Well, because the reason for that would be to see if to prove he's still not able to produce heirs, to put it crudely.
Right. Okay.
And so he was then able to return to Egypt, and he has a burial mastaba in Egypt. Now, the classical archaeologists call this Ptah Shepsis, and it's actually in the British Museum. So the thing which actually tells you the story of Moses, and you can see his name, is in the British Museum, and the British Museum doesn't know.
Right.
And they call it the false story of Ptah Shepsis.
Right. So what year are we talking? Is it, 1500 BC?
Yeah, about that, 1400 BC, yeah.
Right.
Although chronology is another thing. I mean, I think
Yeah.
all his chronologies may be suspect, but that's another issue.
So it's quite possible that the Moses story is recorded in Egyptian hieroglyphs,
Yes.
because they were writing those hieroglyphs 1500 BC. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the accusation.
It's not been borrowed from an earlier time. I mean.
Well, I mean that's a whole different subject. But if you're going with the conventional chronology of things,
right.
There's a lot of discussion when this book was written, and it still goes on today, that they're trying to show that there were no Old Testament characters. It's all just made up. Because if there were, why is there no mention of them in the hieroglyphs? It's like, well, if there is, and they were a dynasty that actually ran the show. The other thing he points out here is that Egypt was a part of a larger empire. This is the key point. So the big emperor they're talking about, the pharaoh, which interestingly is a Welsh word. If you look in the old dictionary, you see pharaoh means high powers, rather than a particular job title, as it were. The emperor would not have been there all the time. And as always happens, you'd know more about this than I do, but there's always a preference to have a foreign body run the country. It makes you less susceptible to I guess, the country being taken over or something. Like the Pope has a Swiss Guard, and the French kings have Escos, they have the Scottish regiment. This kind of thing's always gone on. So the Hyksos, this is where the story of the Bible, where Joseph gets put in charge. He's a viceroy. He's running the country for the absentee emperor.
Right. Yeah.
And it's part of a bigger empire. And the whole thing, this other thing this book reveals, is the whole history of the Middle East is completely different to how we're presented.
Right.
The big thing was the Hittites and the Chaldeans and all this, these huge wars that were going on back and forth across that whole area, right up to Anatolia and east. The problem is, in the west, we discovered Egypt first with the old academics and that, and the pyramids are so impressive and the hieroglyphs. And you just think, wow, this place is amazing. This is the center of everything in the Middle East or Near East. Actually, no, that's a little sideshow. You can see the earlier, it's actually the invasion that took place. Egypt was invaded, and this is why it's not a very popular message to the Egyptians either, because you're talking about an occupying country doing this. Right. So I'll give you an analogy. Say in 500 years' time, an archaeologist went to India, they would look around, they'd see statues of Queen Victoria, they'd see English writing on all the statues, and they would assume English is the language and Victoria was the Queen. What they wouldn't realise is, no, that wasn't actually the language of the common people.
Yeah.
The language has been adopted by the academic level, and the scribes, and the Indian civil service still runs on English. But actually, how would an archaeologist think, well, actually, it was some little island, wherever it is, 10,000 miles away, that did all this? It clicked an amazing leap of imagination to come to that conclusion.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so...
Right. And of course, the language is crucial, because if you can't do the language, you can't read them. Anyway, so Trojan War, so it builds on that one, really. So we're really into ancient history, and this is looking at the...
Yeah, a number of people have requested that book of myself when I ran out of their original copies, so it's good that you've had them reprinted, because they're not available now. Well, they are now. You've had them.
Yes.
Is that reprinted word for word?
Right, well, this is called a second edition.
Right.
Because what we've done here, I've got to say, people like Patricia Gilcash and Marshall Abrahams, I got so many volunteers. I don't think that was just me doing all this. It would be impossible. How Wilson and Blackett did it, I have no idea. But this is what we've done here. This has had some light editing.
Right.
So some of the repetition's been removed. Try to get things in a more logical order, if
Just
you like.
hold that up to the camera, Ross, so we can see. I love the caricatures.
Thank you.
So accurate, yeah.
Oh, you like it?
Yeah. The title is interesting of that book,
Yes.
because it's so Alan Wilson, because the most controversial thing about that book is the dating of that war, isn't it? Because other historians will say there's no way that the Trojan War occurred at 650 BC. That's the contentious thing that book is saying, and he puts it right on the cover and says the Trojan War of 650 BC.
Yeah, no disputing it. Yeah, that's very Alan's style. Yeah, these points are up for discussion with Alan, as far as Alan's concerned. But you're right. I mean, even more critically, the consensual history, let's call it that, is that the Trojan War didn't happen at all. Because the difficulty you have, you see, is if you look at, this is where it comes back to Britain's hidden histories, why it's so important. The British history claims that I'm not just talking about the Welsh now, I'm talking about the English and that, are descendants of Troy. So London used to be called Troy Novantis, New Troy. So this
is this through Brutus?
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah. Through the Brutus migration. Yeah, you've got it. Yes, so you've got the Roman records talk about it as well. It's weird. We've got this fascination with everything written by Romans is sacrosanct, apart from this, which is all just myths and legends and nonsense. So after Troy, you've got Aeneid, then you come to the journey, Virgil's writings. So anyway, you come down a few generations later, you've got Brutus. So what they've done, they become the Etruscans. So they're in Etruria, sort of north of Italy. And at some point then, by prophecy, and whether or not prophecies are written before or after the events, Brutus is prophesied to kill both his parents. So his mother dies in childbirth, there's some sort of hunting accident, he accidentally kills his father, he has to leave Italy, and what he does, he goes back, this is the narrative you get from British history and from the Roman history, he goes back to Anatolia with the other half of the people. So what you have, you've got this people migrating up from the biblical lands. If you go to the end of the Bible, it talks about them going up north. So they end up in modern-day Turkey, Anatolia. So half have gone and become Etruscans. Brutus has either called them or gone to collect them. The other half, you you could put little cartoons up there. I've got him talking to them, saying, "We go into a land which is green and fertile," and the two Etruscans are sniggering to each other from Turkey. Does that mean it's always raining? You know, this is so he's convinced them. This is the key part then of British history. I would say it's the most important part, because the migration we have then is to come through the Mediterranean and up into Britain, and that's how the Cymry and
mainly Western Britain, would you say? An island?
Well, that would be, except London's called New Troy, and that's in the southeast, isn't it? So, I mean, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because you've got the earlier Albine migrations going back to 1400 BC, and they're also part of this. And this is where you get Albanatus for Alban for Scotland, Loicris for London, for England, Loigris, and Cambria for Wales.
What year is Brutus? Is that 500?
That's about 500 BC. Yeah, that's right.
500 BC.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the idea is, if there's no Troy, then all of British history is a myth, you see. This is why it's so important. If you can show there is a Troy, and then you've got, Alan Wilson always quotes the fact that Schliemann, you know, in the 1880s, 1890s, discovered what he called Troy. But of course that's controversial as well. Is that Troy? And that's rubbished. One of the reasons I think it's so attacked is because it supports British history.
Right.
And then you get some fascinating questions. If it was faked British history in medieval times or something, how on earth did they know about things they reference in Anatolia? And why is it we've got in Turkey there's places called Gymri, and is Crimea a corruption of the word Cymru? And the Greeks talk about the Chimeroi coming through. This is all explored in this. This is not just about the Trojan War.
Right.
In fact, it's a couple of years since I did this, and I think it's about page 300 before you actually get to the Trojan War.
Right.
In typical Wilson and Blackett fashion.
Yeah.
They've got all the things I've just summarised very briefly. I've gone through in great detail why it's important,
Right.
the British record.
So the Brutus line from 500 BC, does that link to the Arthurian line of, what, the 6th century AD?
Yes, well, this is the argument, how far can you go back and trace it? So this is where they haven't shown their family tree all the way back to Brutus.
Right.
But I think they've done enough research to do that. Some of the stuff I need to get together to try and make those links. Funny enough, I asked the same question about a week ago. That's the kind of thing we're looking at, because I don't think they've actually published that direct link to Brutus per se. It does go back quite a long way in the ancient British kings. Now we've got people like in our group, like Marshall Abrahams, who's an author and is brilliant at this stuff, and she is putting together a book at the moment talking about the migrations. And of course another, it's not just Wilson and Blackett in what we're doing. I mean, this is the bedrock and the cornerstone, but you've got like Eamon Wilkins talking about did the Trojan War happen in Britain? This is a very interesting theory, and that ties in with a lot of ancient British history and the first migration, and that war seems though it could have taken place about 1100 BC.
Right.
So again, we've got another situation where a couple of stories have been conflated, because what Wilson Blackett show is the character again. The Trojan War is best thought of a little bit like D-Day. For us, it's the biggest thing in World War II.
Right.
This is the main centre of everything. But actually, if you look at the numbers, there's about 2 divisions of Germans on the Western Front and, 80, 90 divisions fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front. Right. And it's a similar thing here. And it explains why so many people have come from different areas, because empires are clashing and bringing people in. So the whole narrative, the Trojan War, changes and makes more sense. And the other revelation then is how much the Egyptian connections come in and why the hieroglyphs are important. Because you can see that Agamemnon was actually, Ramesses the First, and you can go through all the Trojan War characters and see that they're based in Greece. And if you look at things like not so much the Iliad, but if you look at the Odyssey, you can see in there it actually mentions them going back to Egypt. Why has no one picked up on this?
Right.
It's one of these things that once Wilson Blackett point the things out to you, you look at Homer, or you look at the Bible, look at these books, you think, yeah, it does say that. Why have I never noticed that?
Right. Any more books that you've had republished?
Yeah, so Trojan War, I just want to say on this one, what we did on there was resourced it all out, and then with Patricia Gilcash, a brilliant job. We've got an index now, you've got references and appendixes and all that, and it should flow better as a read. There's this book which I don't like to talk about. This is more your area. This is all about.
So this is all about the the bomb that was put under Baron Blackett's bed by somebody. Well, we don't know who did it. It nearly killed him. He was in a coma for 11 days.
His health's still bad. Yeah.
Yeah, you can watch this you can watch that story from previous Richplanet episodes.
Yes.
It's not really a history book, this one.
No.
No. Any others, Ross?
Yeah. So this
So
is
the King Arthur conspiracy. This is one of
It's a
Alan.
huge one,
This
yeah.
was a later, what, 1990s?
actually, I think it's 2005. I think.
Right, 2005. So that's after the Holy Kingdom. So in between all this, we've got the Holy Kingdom, which you haven't had reprinted because that's Adrian Gilbert's.
Yes, another publisher and
It's
everything,
another
yeah.
publisher. So the King Arthur Conspiracy, you've split that book into 2 books, and they're both available on your website.
Yes, that's
now.
right. Yeah, and I'd like to make available through your website as well. We'll get
All
that
right.
going on there, because what we have is it's such a vast book.
Yeah, if someone's interested in King Arthur and this work, I usually point them to the Holy Kingdom because that's considered the most easy to read and all-encompassing. It doesn't have any of the vitriol that these books have in it.
No.
I mean, what would you recommend? Because people might be sitting watching this thinking, well, I want to
Where do
buy.
you start?
I'd
Yeah.
like to read one, but I don't know which one to read.
I agree with you. It's such a vast thing. And we've gone just in the last 10 minutes of talking from ancient Egypt and the Trojan War and journeys around the world all the way up to 6th, 7th century. Because what this book focuses on is the alleged or claimed migration of the Welsh to North America in the 6th century.
Yeah.
Almost 1,000 years before Columbus. That's what this is. So it's split into 2. So it's so vast. So this
Yeah.
part,
Just to interject, Ross,
Yeah, go
there's evidence in places like Kentucky.
yeah. Well, Lee Pennington's done great work over there. Yes.
Of artifacts that look like they've come from Wales.
Yes, yes.
At what age? What year?
Yeah, we're talking about 6th century.
6th century. So the 6th century exploration from Wales
Yes.
to America.
Yes.
That's what it's arguing.
Yeah, and the Welsh accounts, if you look at, even the Mabinogi describes it, if you know how to read these things, is that they started off, when the comet came, this is the biggest event in British history, which is never talked about. So the comet, around about 562, this is we could talk all week about
and
that.
there's physical evidence of that, isn't
Well, yeah,
there?
like vitrified forts
yes,
and
yeah.
this kind
So,
of thing. Yeah.
you know, we're not. This isn't legend or anything. There's physical evidence of
Yes.
of some huge cataclysm which put Britain into darkness for 11
Yeah, it
years.
just shattered the country.
Right,
yeah.
right. But
yeah.
carry on.
Yeah, so this is, so as part of that story then, you have Maddoc Morfran, which is the cormorant. It's just sort of a nickname, if you like. Now, whether or not he went deliberately to find new lands or he was driven off course during that period, he's ended up in North America. And after so many years, 8, 9 years, something like that, he's come back and say, guess what, found this new land. So then Quairon, I think his name is, the other admiral goes back with him to check the story out, to see if they can get there. Yes, they can. So the idea is then that they took, I think it's 1,000 ships, with about 70 per ship. So you're talking a large migration, like 70,000 people, set sail from Milford Haven. And what you find on the American side of things, it's like Jim Michaels, before he sadly passed away, Lee Pennington, there's the Archaeological Society, Old Kentucky.
Yeah. So just to interject, these are American researchers.
Yes.
Who've been unearthing artifacts that appear that they originate in Wales. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's certain things
So-
which you wouldn't expect to see. So, for example, you've got woven goods like cotton, which they didn't weave. You've got certain metal production, which is not, but most critically, which comes in this book again, it's the writing. And there's writing on certain caves and mounds and things, or on stones, lots of stones, engraved stones in America. And what Wilson and Blackley have done is show those stones can again be read using this ancient Welsh writing system. I should call it a British system. I don't want to come across as just a Welsh thing. It's not. The reason why it's the language is maintained in Wales and the records are maintained. What's left of them haven't been obliterated. That's why Wales comes up so often. But like, for example, when we're looking at Arthur the First, you mentioned the 2 Arthurs, he's in Warwickshire. The campaigns of Arthur II, they're in Scotland. King Lear was in Leicestershire. Elmet was in the north of England. It's not just about Wales, just that's where the records ended up because the rest got flattened. And this led to the invasion or arrival, because as Alan Wilson always says, if you had a calamity, in those days people didn't send help, they sent armies,
Right,
The country's devastated and they come in. And also even the Anglo-Saxon brutes talk of wandering tribes, everyone, traumatized and shattered.
This is after the comet.
Yeah, nothing's growing, there's
Yeah.
some sort of contamination of the lands. So they've walked in. This is why archaeologists aren't finding any evidence of conflict, because that part had been wiped out, really.
All right.
This is a massive tragedy in British history.
So any other books that have been republished, Ross?
Well, this is a new one then. This is, here's one, which is...
Again, just with the title. So Alan's written this, yeah?
I came up with the title, because I know
all right,
you're not a fan of this title, are
No,
you?
I'm not a fan of the title. Thing is, that's not going to show up well against the green screen. Let me
No, it's not. It's an invisible book, isn't
it? Yeah, the invisible book where Jesus is buried.
Yeah, you can see through me now. I've got an invisible chest.
Let's just...
the original title I had for it was Britain's Hidden Christianity, which I think would have been... I should have stuck with it. I thought this would be sensational. There's loads of books, but...
Let me just say a few things about that claim first,
Yes.
because
Yes.
I don't want to tarnish all the Arthurian work and this work
Yes.
about the Middle East with a possibly untrue claim. Now,
Yes.
I'm not saying it's not true, right?
Yes.
But I think as you go further back in time, let's say from the Arthurian time, I think the evidence gets more sparse, let's say. So, I mean, I know that there are researchers other than Wilson and Blackett who say that Joseph of Arimathea, who was Jesus's, I think Mary's uncle or great uncle, right, a relative of Jesus,
Yeah, relative anyway.
who looked after his body after he came down off the cross, right, and he came to Britain. So it's not just Wilson and Blackett who claim that. I've heard Adrian Gilbert say it, and I've heard other researchers say that Joseph of Arimathea, who was spreading Christianity, came to Britain, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm prepared to entertain that. Now, so the theory that Jesus survived the crucifixion and then came to Britain, right, is a stretch for some people. And you look at, there are academics who've looked at the history of Jesus in great detail, looking at records, who will say there wasn't a person called Jesus. So he was made up in order to write the Bible or to control people. He was this figure that they've moved him from so many years earlier, much in the distant past, because there are characters that have Jesus as attributes in ancient Egypt, and perhaps they've just brought him forward and just renamed him for the purposes of their holy book, right? Yep. Now, I'm not saying that's true.
No, I can explain.
I know that there are academics who will contend that Jesus was not a real person in the way that he's described or named in the Bible, right? Now, in this book, Wilson and Blackett is saying that he's buried in West Wales. Is that right?
Correct,
and they use place names and things like that. And they've written this book. So I'm not selling that book on my website.
Yeah, no,
I haven't read it. So perhaps I shouldn't pass judgment, right? But in terms of,
I can
so
points,
over to you, Ross.
Yeah, okay, all right. Let's go through all those things. It's one of these things where it's been twisted and matched up, and the pieces need taken apart and putting them back together in the right order again. Okay, so all those things you say all apply, but not in the way you might think. Mm-hmm. The first thing we have to be aware of, right? The story. The first thing is that they do identify the historical Jesus. Okay, this is the important thing here. Mm-hmm. So this family tree, and the key thing is who he was is crucial. He's not some peasant whose dad was a carpenter, and he is married as well. It would be mentioned in the Bible if he wasn't married as well. There's no way, if he's some sort of rabbi, he could be unmarried throughout his whole adult life. He'd be known as Jesus the unmarried one, or something like that. So what you can do is, what Wilson Blackett done here is trace who his wife was, right, and her ancestry is crucial, because her ancestry goes back then, her father, the king of Juba, the third, I think, and the mother would have been Cleopatra the eighth. She's the daughter, she's a product of the union between Mark Antony and Cleopatra the seventh, I think. So they're the descent. Jesus, what this book also describes is who the Hasmoneans are, who the Edomians are, goes through all the different sources, the Jewish sources, Talmud, all this kind of thing, and work out what you had, the political situation in what we call Israel today, or the Bible lands, is crucial, and that's what's not taken into account when people do the analysis. So you've got the family which Herod is a descendant of, the famous Herod. His dealings with the Romans are going on. He's Edmodian, I'm going to say that slightly wrong, Edomian, there's the names get a bit confusing. And his claim on the throne is tenuous, because the real dynasty, the real descendants, that comes down to Jesus. Now, if you bear in mind then that he's also got the lost tribe connections with Britain, so what you have is a situation, if these claims are correct, where we've got the claim to be the descendant of Israelites, you know, from David and Solomon, these kind of things, the original Holy Family, and potentially the claim, whatever the claims Jesus has got. But his wife gives claims then to Egypt, and also with Mark Antony as an ancestor, you've got a direct claim to the whole Roman Empire, whatever that is, which I don't think this Roman Empire as such as we're described. That's another issue. I think it's more to do with the Etruscans. But anyway, using the framework everyone's familiar with, you're playing for all the marbles. Here you've got a descendant. Their child, the Abelach, as he's been termed, is potentially a descendant for all the major kingdoms or empires or powers in the Western Mediterranean. So it's a really high stakes game. That's the first thing about this book. And he goes on to explain to justify that, show who the family tree is, how that's arrived at, all those things. Then, which is really fascinating, is the whole, using the Bible as the main source. So you can read this and read your Bible, you can see it's all there. What seems to have happened is Joseph Arimathea comes in and a deal was done. A deal was struck with Romans. Pontius Pilate, people like this, it's been arranged that what seems to have happened is the son, because if you remember in the Bible, there's this sort of mock situation, it seems to be a bit stage managed. Who do you want to release? Do you want the peaceful Jesus released, or do you want Barabbas released? If you remember that scene from the Bible. Well, Barabbas, from the Arabic, Bar, son of, Abbas is the master, so the son of the master. So what's put forward here is that there's a deal is struck whereby they set Barabbas free, who's the son of Jesus. So the story goes that I would put in my slight addition to it is that there was an armed conflict, which Josephus talks about. There's an armed uprising. This is what the turning over the tables of the money changers refers to as the armed insurrection, because the claiming the temple was the first thing you had to do. So these are people armed with swords and stuff. But unfortunately for them, there's a unit of regular soldiers near enough by to come and crush the rebellion. The son of Jesus seems to have been captured. And Jesus,
the son of Jesus?
Yeah, the son, Barabbas.
Okay.
Barabbas, he's in the Bible, Barabbas.
Right.
Why wouldn't he have a son? Why wouldn't he be married?
Yeah.
Why is it so important for people as well? It's quite a normal thing for people to do. I'll say it'd be noted if he hadn't. If he'd be the unmarried one, it'd be very strange.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so Judas, who's been cast throughout history as being the ultimate traitor, probably a brother of Jesus, he's the one trusted to do the negotiations. And a deal is struck whereby in return for the son, Barabbas, Jesus will hand himself over to whether apparently be executed or really be executed. So that's the scene in the Garden of Gethsemane where Peter, as Alan says, there's a bit of a clot it comes across in the Bible, is that a deal was done. So you have the scene where when he comes up and Jesus gives the kiss, it's a signal that the deal's been put in place. And then is talking in the Bible then of someone in a robe running across the field. Well, this would be the son of Jesus being released. So the Romans have fulfilled their side of the bargain. Jesus there's hands him in. We go, all the trial is explained, this ridiculous bouncing from place to place, and how the justices all rush through. And then he's crucified on the eve of Passover. Now, there can't be any executions in Passover. They have to be stopped at sundown. Now, with the crucifixion, it could take days for someone to die. It's a horrible, very slow death.
Unimaginable.
Yeah, unimaginable. But he's within a few hours. If you look at the Greek, I don't know how Alan Wilson can translate Greek as well anyway, but they talk about the body and they refer to it as a living body in the Greek text of the Bible. And Pilate, if you remember, he's shocked. Like, what do you mean he's dead already? He's only been up there a few hours. So this kind of shenanigans is going on. And they already had the grave prepared. That was all waiting, all part of the deception. So the difficulty comes in then after the crucifixion. And it's in the Bible. It says in the Bible, he eats a meal. He's not a ghost. Doubting Thomas. He said, where's the holes, look, this is me, and I'm hungry, I want a meal. Well, if he's some sort of ghostly figure, why is he hungry? Why is he eating? So anyway, you follow the story on. What Wilson Blackett are brilliant at then is they then go to the political situation in Rome. And this is what's missed out by other researchers. Because what's happened, up until then, you've had Tiberius living his crazy playboy lifestyle on his island, Capri. And in the meantime, you've got Sejanus has taken over. If you look at I'd highly recommend the old BBC I, Claudius series, where you can see a young Patrick Stewart being Sejanus, and he's all heroes and hips and all that kind of stuff, and legs on tables. He's taken over and he's doing a coup of Rome. And this is happening during Sejanus' rule. And Herod is tied in with Sejanus. So what then happens is Tiberius gets tipped off what's going on. And then you have the retribution. Sejanus and his son are strangled and horrible things. And he recaptures control. And suddenly, the what's-its hit the fan. Because what the heck's going on in the Middle East? What deal's going on here? How can this guy who's supposed to be executed still be walking around? No, go on. Sorry, I see you dying to jump in. Go on, yes.
Well, okay. So somehow he then ends up in Britain.
Well, he has to escape from that area, because if you look at a map of the Mediterranean, it's all Roman territory. The only bit not conquered at that point is Britain. And also he's got his fellow people. If you follow the migrations from 500 BC, there's already like-minded people there. His own people are there. He might even be part of the royal family and have inheritance claims. Because what they do show then is that with the Holy Family tree, is they marry into the Holy Family. And Claudius seems to have been very impressed because he married one of his own daughters into the British family, which is really weird if they're just a bunch of primitive tribesmen.
And there are some Welsh place names that they say are connected to Jesus.
The whole story, yeah.
In that book.
Well, one of the big things is Dewi. Who's Dewi? The patron saint of Wales, right? Well, the name is David, right? Well, what's the Welsh for David? It's David.
Yeah.
It's not Dewi.
Yeah.
Dewi means one with God.
Right.
David means David. David was the nutty monk from the 6th century who, got the monks to pull the plough instead of the oxen and tried to live on cabbage water and all that kind of stuff. He's David. Dewi's one with God. Right. Now, if you look, the National Day in Wales...
So they're mixing up two characters, you think?
No, I think it's just a complete swap.
Right.
Because the National Day in Wales, Dydd Dewi Sant, or St David's Day, is March the 1st, which ties in then. If you look at the scenes of the birth, the nativity scenes, you've got the shepherds with the young lambs and all this. It's a spring event. So March the 1st would seem to tie in with those dates. And the reason it got moved to December is for the Saturnalian festival. And also you've got the winter solstice where the sun's at its lowest point. The sun dies for 3 days.
Yes,
it comes up, we all have a celebration. And then you've got those weird few days till the New Year starts. Yeah. Well, it's been moved. The original, the claim would be, the original birth, if you like, or the holy day for Christianity is March the 1st. And it's Dewi, and it's still celebrated in Wales. And another weird thing to add on that is if you look at the daffodil, the national flower of Wales, if you join they've got 6 points and you join them together, it's a Star of David. And you've even got the sun in the middle. So you've got the sun in the middle of the Star of David, and that blooms in the spring. So everything ties in that. Like I said, it's with names, and you've got the place names named after Dewi, and the whole story, and you can track down, this is where Jesus is buried. Maybe I shouldn't have gone with that title. I think Britain's Hidden Christianity might be better. I don't know. I thought this would get more attention. Yeah. But you can see it's a very well researched. Oh yeah, I want to get back to. Sorry,
Yes. So this is a book. Sorry. So this is a new Wilson and Blackett book.
From their work, though.
From their work that you've had published. Are there any other books?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing on that, because one thing, I just want to make the big point on this, is because all those points you raised about the doubt on it, you have to, this is the key. You've raised all the most important points. I had to give a preamble to get there. Paul has come in, and he has infiltrated the nascent Christian movement. He's tried to become an apostle. He wasn't accepted. He's tried to become a disciple. He wasn't accepted. Somehow he's forced his way in to be the one creating the new Christian message. Now don't forget, if this is correct, Jesus and the original message, that's gone. They've left. They've gone to Britain. Paul is writing later. Paul has got to create a version of Christianity, which is the one we know. And this is where, like you said, he draws on the ancient Egyptian Osiris myths, the same myth was used for Darius the Great, or Cyrus the Great, sorry. You know, the idea of the virgin birth and found in the reeds, all these kind of narratives. That's been created by the Roman Church. The original Christian message, that's already gone. That's already in Britain.
Right.
Before the New Testament.
Yeah.
And the idea of Peter being the first pope, all that is nonsense. If you look in the Bible, 2 Timothy, Linus is the son of King Caradoc. And this is where you get the British links. Yeah.
I've heard Alan say that Christianity came to Britain and then was taken to Rome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So this is what makes history so interesting, Ross, is that there is a debate about these subjects.
Yes.
And you welcome people to come onto your YouTube channel and refute that Jesus came to Britain. You want to have that discussion and you want to have that debate and you want new ideas.
Yes.
So you're open to, as long as people aren't being vitriolic and throwing things at each other, as long as they're debating in a decent way, you're happy to entertain, all debate on these historical subjects.
This is how the subject develops. Yeah, the problem is that it's like red rag to a bull or a dog whistle. Every time you say the words Wilson and Blackett, you just get the same vitriol all the time. It's very difficult to actually get them to say, okay, which part of their work do you have an issue with? What is it you have a problem with? They always do ad hominem, it's called, isn't it? They just attack their personalities and that kind of thing. It's very frustrating from that point of view.
Now, so your YouTube channel is Britain's Hidden History.
Ross, yeah.
Sorry.
Britain's Hidden History, one word, and Ross. But you'll find it anyway.
Right. And just tell us how often you update it and what's on there. What will people find there?
Oh, on the YouTube channel?
Yes.
Oh, it's almost 500 videos now.
Right.
So what I suggest, if you go on there, if you type in Alan Wilson or Wilson and Blackett or Ross Broadstock, it'll come up because there's now, we just passed 5,000 followers, so it's getting quite big. So you can look up almost any topic if you search it and go through the videos. And the big event, if you like, is every Sunday evening. There's a live show, 8 o'clock, where you get me talking about these subjects. And usually it's about 1,500 to 2,000 people watch every Sunday, which amazes me.
Right.
Because we're on next week will be episode 120.
Right, well, hopefully after this goes out, you'll have a few more viewers.
Yeah, it would be nice to see. Because every time I talk to Alan, I say, Alan, we've got 5,000 people following us now. And he's like, oh, it should be 50,000,
I know what he's like.